if there was this meeting, which is now admitted by Donald Trump Jr., right, with these emails, that meeting occurred, right? It occurred. So a couple of questions. The first is, did the boss know? Did Donald Trump Sr., apparently ensconced in his office one floor above, was he aware that this meeting was happening? Did he get a report after the meeting? Did he know it was happening? You can imagine, right? Somebody comes in and says, hey, the Russian government wants to mobilize its tremendous resources to help you get elected president, and here's an initial sample. I mean, was there a packet of information that was maybe simply dropped off, that was simply left there? And if you got such a message, wouldn't you say, well, what's the follow-up, right? Now, the other one is what I would add to this is that there was a second person accompanying Madame Veselnitskaya, supposedly a translator who, well, wait a minute, who's that person? Who's that person? The translator could be anybody. The translator could be the FSB resident in New York City. We don't know that. And you always want to wonder, because if you remember, well, you remember, but in the last day in the life of Franklin D. Roosevelt, he was visited by a Russian immigrant, white Russian painter, Madame Shumatov, who was accompanied by another Russian, who I think had an anglicized name, who was there. I don't know, you know this better than me, and he was supposedly her photographer. So when you get people, is what I'm saying, when you get people, it doesn't matter what they claim to be, what label they have at the moment, right? You have to think, who is that person? Can they be interviewed? Can they become a witness?
Precisely, and that leads the entire story, I think, into a new dimension. Some interesting further background here. Now, this guy Farenthold, right, award-winning anti-Trump journalist or investigator of the current administration. Look at it that way. I'm sure if it had been Hillary, he'd be investigating her. But the question now is it normal to have such a meeting? And I think what some of them point out here is, why do this in person here? Gary Maloney, longtime Republican opposition researcher, right? So somebody who knows the game, he's surprised that Trump Jr. attended the meeting in person along with Kushner and Manafort, right? Look at that. That's a top level committee, not even a top level person, but that's the whole top layer of this campaign. Because remember, Manafort was the campaign manager, Kushner was the IT guy, and then, of course, the boss's son. Maloney said he would have expected a consultant or a researcher to go instead. This also struck me, right? What kind of an organization, an unknown person with an unknown mission, comes in and they say, here, go right to the top, meet the entire board of directors, essentially what this is. I do know, this guy Maloney says he doesn't fault Donald Jr., but where's the team? The manager's job is to protect the candidate and family from blowback. Maloney says he worked for Bush 88, right? That would be the Bush candidacy, right? Republicans. And he said, yes, would Lee Atwater have allowed George W. Bush to sit down at this? So we're talking Bush 88. This is George H.W. Bush on his way to winning the presidency in 1988 against Dukakis, right? So he says, if you were working as I was in the George H.W. Bush 88 campaign, one, would Lee Atwater have allowed George W. Bush to go into such a sit-down meeting? Inconceivable. Would John Podesta have allowed Chelsea Clinton into such a meeting? It's impossible. Very good. These are good points. Now, as I think we mentioned yesterday, Common Cause has now filed a complaint with the Justice Department and with Mueller, asking Mueller to investigate whether the younger Trump had violated election law. This is Paul Ryan, a different one from Common Cause, doing it. There's also the question of secret stuff. Al Gore, in his campaign against George W. Bush, right? This is 2000. Tom Downey, right-wing Democratic congressman was going to impersonate Bush in the debate prep, and they received a package with materials stolen from the from the Bush campaign. Their strategy essentially in the debate. So Tom Downey said, "No, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to seal it. Call the FBI and give it to them." The FBI guy came over and said, "Congressman, what's the crime?" And I said, "This debate material is probably worth a small fortune. So this looks like illegal property, right? Receiving stolen goods." Some Gore supporters thought that was naive, but the guy said, Downey says, "I had this image in my mind of in front of a congressional committee, and I'm asked, why didn't you turn this over to the FBI?" There's another one too. I have to mention this because it's older. In 1980, the debate briefing book for Carter was delivered to the Reagan campaign, and Reagan, was then elected president. Right, that's 1980, and everybody at the time wondered. Right, this was called Debate Gate or Briefing Gate. Debate Gate, Briefing Gate, 1980, and it turned out. This is sort of a humorous aside. This turned out to be a Democratic operative of the Kennedy family, a guy called Paul Corbin, a notorious rogue. He's in the same class as maybe Dick Tuck or Segretti or people like this. He was a sort of an election trickster. And what could that have been? Well, could that have been the revenge of the Kennedy machine against Carter, right? Since Ted Kennedy didn't get to the nomination, were they trying to make sure that Carter, that was in '76, that Carter in '80 would not be reelected? Maybe Teddy Kennedy wanted to have another go. Anyway, that's all pure speculation. You get the idea, right? This stuff can come in all different ways.